An abandoned house, its windows shattered, walls covered in dust and decay. Inside, in the darkest corner, a faint whimper echoes. Chained to a rusted pipe, a helpless puppy fights for survival, alone, starving, and scared. But when a stranger steps inside, everything changes. What happens next will break your heart and restore your faith in humanity. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this to you. The sky roared with thunder, sending ripples of fear through the empty streets. Rain lashed against the skeletal remains of an abandoned house, its broken windows rattling from the wind. Inside, the dim glow of a flashlight flickered as Ryan, a 27-year-old paramedic, cautiously stepped over the debris. He wasn't here for a thrill. He was here because of a call that had shaken him to his core. An old neighbor had tipped him off. "A dog's been crying in there for days," the elderly man had whispered. "I think someone left him to die." Ryan's chest tightened at the thought. He had seen enough suffering in his job, but nothing prepared him for what he found in the back room. The dog, a frail, mud-covered retriever mix, was curled into a ball, barely breathing. A thick, rusted chain dug into the skin of his neck, attached to an old pipe. His fur, soaked from the leaks in the roof, clung to his thin frame. His ribs jutted out sharply, each breath a struggle. Ryan crouched beside him, his voice barely above a whisper. "Hey, buddy, you're not alone anymore." The dog flinched but didn't move. He was too weak to fight, too exhausted to care. Ryan's hands trembled as he pulled out his pocket knife, working on the corroded chain. The rain poured through the cracks in the ceiling, cold droplets splashing onto the dog's shivering body. With a final tug, the chain snapped. The dog collapsed onto Ryan's lap, his breathing shallow. Ryan knew time was running out. He lifted the frail creature into his arms, his soaked jacket wrapping around the trembling body. The weight in his arms was heartbreakingly light. "Hang in there, buddy. I've got you." As he stepped outside, lightning split the sky. Rain poured harder, drenching them both as Ryan sprinted toward his truck. He had saved countless lives before, but this one felt different. This one couldn't slip away. The storm raged on as Ryan sped down the deserted highway, the rain hammering against his windshield like thousands of tiny fists demanding to be heard. His knuckles were white from gripping the steering wheel, his heart pounding against his ribs as he stole frantic glances at the fragile creature wrapped in the damp towel on the passenger seat. The dog was barely breathing, his tiny chest rising and falling in shallow, inconsistent movements. The whimpering had stopped. Ryan wasn't sure if that was a good sign or the worst thing imaginable. Every fiber of his being screamed at him to drive faster, but the roads were slick, and one wrong move could cost them both their lives. "Just hold on, buddy," Ryan muttered, his voice thick with desperation. "You're not dying today." The glowing neon sign of the 24-hour vet clinic emerged through the storm like a beacon of hope. Ryan barely slowed the truck before throwing it into park, shoving open the door, and scooping the limp dog into his arms. He sprinted inside, his breath coming in sharp bursts as he pushed through the entrance. "Help!" His voice cracked as he rushed to the front desk, his shoes squeaking against the tile. "I found him like this. He's freezing. He's not responding." The receptionist's eyes widened as she saw the fragile bundle in his arms. Without hesitation, she called for emergency assistance, and within seconds, a team of veterinary staff appeared, wheeling a stretcher toward them. A nurse gently took the dog from Ryan's arms, moving with a sense of urgency that sent dread curling in his gut. "We've got him. What happened?" Ryan swallowed, his throat dry. "I found him chained up in an abandoned house. He was barely conscious. I don't know how long he's been there." The vet, an older woman with tired but kind eyes, placed a stethoscope against the pup's frail chest, listening intently. "Severely malnourished, dehydrated, hypothermic. His heartbeat is weak. We need to stabilize him, now." Ryan stood frozen as they wheeled the stretcher down the hall, disappearing behind a set of double doors. The world felt unnervingly still in their absence. His hands trembled, his shirt soaked from both the rain and sweat. He had done all he could. Now, it was up to them. Minutes passed, then an hour. Ryan paced the waiting room, his mind racing. He had no reason to be this invested. This was just a stray. He could walk away, leave the responsibility to someone else. But deep inside, he knew he wouldn't. He couldn't. A soft voice broke through his spiraling thoughts. "Mr. Taylor?" Ryan turned sharply, finding the vet standing in the doorway, her expression unreadable. His heart stuttered. "How is he?" She sighed, running a hand over her face. "He's not out of the woods yet. His organs are weak from starvation, and the wounds around his neck are infected. But he's holding on." Ryan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Can I see him?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Just for a moment." Ryan followed her into the dimly lit treatment room, his steps slow, hesitant. The dog lay on a soft blanket, an IV line running into his tiny leg. He looked impossibly small against the vastness of the medical equipment surrounding him. But he was breathing. That was enough. Kneeling beside him, Ryan hesitated before gently placing a hand on the pup's head. "You're a fighter, huh?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You weren't ready to give up." The dog's tail twitched, barely a movement, but enough to send a lump straight to Ryan's throat. He swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "That's it, buddy. You keep fighting." For the first time in years, Ryan felt something crack inside him. A wall he hadn't realized he had built. He had gone into that house expecting nothing but decay and silence. Instead, he had found something worth saving. And maybe, just maybe, that little dog had saved him too. Ryan sat in the dimly lit waiting room, the stale scent of antiseptic and coffee mixing in the air. The clock on the wall ticked away the hours, yet time felt frozen. His eyes burned from exhaustion, but he refused to close them. Not while the little dog fought for his life beyond those sterile white doors. Every so often, a nurse would walk by, offering a small update. "Still stable," they'd say. "No changes yet." The words felt like a fragile hope. One wrong move, one setback, and that hope would shatter. Ryan clenched his fists. He had done everything he could, but helplessness gnawed at his gut. A soft sound broke the silence, a weak whimper. Ryan's breath caught in his throat. He stood quickly, his heart racing as he followed the sound into the treatment room. The pup lay on a soft blanket, an IV in his leg, his tiny body still frail but alive. His eyes, clouded with exhaustion, flickered open. A soft whine escaped his throat as he weakly lifted his head. Ryan dropped to his knees beside the pup. "Hey there, buddy," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He gently ran his fingers through the pup's fur. "You're safe now." The dog's tail gave the faintest wag. It wasn't much, but it was everything. The vet approached, smiling softly. "He's responding well. The worst might be over, but he has a long road ahead." Ryan exhaled deeply, nodding. He looked back at the pup. "You need a name," he murmured. The vet raised a brow. "Any ideas?" Ryan thought for a moment before smiling. "Lucky," because against all odds, he made it. Lucky's ears twitched as if recognizing his new name. A fresh wave of warmth spread through Ryan's chest. He hadn't planned for this, hadn't expected to feel this strongly about a stray dog he barely knew. But something inside him had shifted. Maybe Lucky wasn't the only one getting a second chance. Ryan settled back, stroking the pup's fur as he drifted into a peaceful sleep. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ryan allowed himself to believe that things might just be okay. Ryan awoke with a stiff neck, his body protesting against the uncomfortable plastic chair. He blinked against the dim hospital lights, his heart skipping a beat as he turned to check on Lucky. The small pup was still curled up on the soft blanket, the IV tube running into his frail leg. His breathing was slow but steady. A nurse entered, offering Ryan a warm smile. "He made it through the night," she said softly, checking the monitors. "His vitals are improving, but he still needs time." Ryan exhaled heavily, relief washing over him like a tidal wave. He reached out, carefully stroking Lucky's ear. "You're a tough little guy, aren't you?" he murmured. The pup didn't move much, but his tail gave a faint wag, just enough to make Ryan smile. It wasn't much, but it was proof that Lucky was still fighting. The vet arrived soon after, flipping through Lucky's chart. "He's still weak, but we're cautiously optimistic. His body is responding to treatment. He'll need special care for a while. Small, frequent meals, gentle rehabilitation. But I think he has a real chance." Ryan nodded, determination settling in his chest. "Whatever he needs, I'll do it." The vet studied him for a moment. "Are you planning to adopt him?" The question caught Ryan off guard. He hadn't let himself think that far ahead. He had only been focused on keeping Lucky alive, on making sure he pulled through. But now, looking at the small, fragile creature who had endured so much, the answer came to him without hesitation. "Yeah," Ryan said, his voice firm. "I think I am." 2 days later, Lucky was cleared to leave the clinic. He was still weak, but his eyes were brighter, and he could stand, if only for a few moments at a time. Ryan carried him carefully to the truck, placing him on a thick blanket in the passenger seat. "Welcome home, buddy," he whispered as he started the engine. The drive back to Ryan's small apartment was quiet, Lucky sleeping most of the way. When they arrived, Ryan gently lifted him out of the truck, cradling him in his arms as he stepped inside. He had already prepared a small bed in the corner of the living room, along with food, water, and a few toys. Carefully, he set Lucky down on the soft cushion. The pup sniffed weakly at his new surroundings before curling up with a sigh. Ryan sat on the floor beside him. "It's not much, but it's safe," he murmured. "And it's yours now." For the first time since rescuing him, Ryan felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't realized he'd been missing for a long time. A sense of purpose, a reason to keep moving forward. Lucky had fought to survive, and now Ryan would make sure he never had to fight alone again. The next few days were a test of patience and resilience. Lucky was adjusting, but his body was still weak, and his mind was even more fragile. Every sudden noise made him flinch. Every unexpected movement sent him cowering into a corner. He had spent too long expecting pain, and trust wouldn't come easily. Ryan spent hours sitting on the floor beside Lucky's bed, speaking softly, offering treats, and waiting. Slowly, Lucky began to show signs of comfort, tiny moments of progress. A cautious sniff of Ryan's hand, a few hesitant steps out of his bed, a slow, careful wag of his tail. One evening, Ryan lay on the couch, exhausted after work, when he felt a small weight press against his feet. He looked down to see Lucky curled up beside him, his big brown eyes staring up as if seeking reassurance. Ryan's throat tightened, and he reached down, gently stroking the pup's head. "You're safe here, buddy," he murmured. "No one's ever going to hurt you again." The next morning, Ryan decided to take Lucky outside for the first time. He fastened a soft, light leash around his collar and carried him to the small park near his apartment. Lucky hesitated, his paws barely touching the grass, his nose twitching as he took in the unfamiliar scents. Ryan knelt beside him. "It's okay. Just take your time." Lucky took a tentative step, then another. Slowly, he began to explore, his tail rising just a bit higher with each passing moment. When he finally turned and looked up at Ryan, something had changed. There was a flicker of trust in his eyes, a small but powerful sign that the past no longer had full control over him. Ryan smiled. "That's my boy." That night, as Lucky curled up beside him on the couch, Ryan realized something. Lucky wasn't the only one learning to trust again. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, Lucky grew stronger. His once frail body filled out, his ribs no longer visible beneath his fur. His golden coat, once matted and dirty, now gleamed with health. But more than his physical transformation, it was the change in his spirit that struck Ryan the most. Lucky was no longer the terrified, broken pup he had found chained in that abandoned house. Slowly, he was learning that not all hands inflicted pain, that not all voices shouted in anger. He was beginning to trust. And, for Ryan, that meant everything. One morning, Ryan woke up to find Lucky curled beside him in bed, his head resting against his chest. It was a small gesture, but one that nearly brought tears to Ryan's eyes. This dog, who had known only cruelty, was finally allowing himself to love, and to be loved in return. Ryan gently stroked Lucky's fur. "You're home now, buddy. No more fear, no more pain. Just us." Lucky sighed softly, as if he understood. As Lucky's confidence grew, Ryan decided it was time for a bigger challenge, a trip to the dog park. It was a gamble. Lucky had never been around other dogs, and his past trauma made Ryan wary of overwhelming him. But he also knew that Lucky needed to experience the world beyond the walls of their apartment. The moment they arrived at the park, Lucky hesitated. His ears flattened, and his tail tucked between his legs. He scanned the unfamiliar surroundings, his body tense with uncertainty. Ryan knelt beside him, offering a reassuring pat. "You're safe. I promise." It took time, but eventually, Lucky took his first steps into the park. Other dogs ran and played freely, their joyful barks echoing in the air. Lucky watched them cautiously, his body still rigid. Then, a friendly golden retriever trotted up to him, wagging its tail. For a moment, Lucky froze. Ryan held his breath. Then, to his surprise, Lucky's tail gave a small wag in return. Ryan's chest tightened with emotion. This was it. A moment of healing, of transformation. Lucky was no longer the abandoned, helpless pup he had once been. He was learning to trust, to let go of the past, to embrace the life he had been given. That night, as Lucky curled up beside him on the couch, Ryan felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Saving Lucky had changed his life in ways he never could have predicted. This journey had been about more than just rescuing a dog. It had been about healing wounds, about finding purpose, about rediscovering what it meant to truly care for someone. Lucky nudged Ryan's hand with his nose, letting out a small sigh of contentment. Ryan smiled. "Yeah, buddy, we did it." And for the first time in a long time, Ryan felt whole and felt the days of fear and uncertainty were behind them. Lucky had transformed, not just physically, but emotionally. No longer the weak, terrified pup Ryan had found in that abandoned house, he was now a happy, playful dog who had found his place in the world. But what Ryan hadn't realized was how much he had changed, too. One morning, as Ryan sat on his porch sipping coffee, he watched Lucky chase after a butterfly, his tail wagging excitedly. It was moments like these that reminded him how far they had come. Lucky had fought for his life, and in doing so, he had given Ryan a purpose, a reason to open his heart again. Ryan had spent so much of his life keeping people at a distance, afraid of loss, afraid of attachment. But Lucky had broken through those walls, one small step at a time. He had reminded Ryan that loving someone, caring for someone, wasn't a weakness. It was a gift. As the months passed, Ryan found himself thinking more and more about how many other dogs were out there, suffering the same fate Lucky had. The thought haunted him. He had saved one life, but what about the others? He couldn't stand the idea of another dog being left to die, alone and scared. That's when the idea hit him. One evening, as Lucky lay beside him on the couch, Ryan pulled out his laptop and began researching animal rescue organizations. He read stories about volunteers who dedicated their lives to saving abandoned animals, about shelters overwhelmed with strays needing homes. He knew what he had to do. Ryan started small, volunteering at a local shelter, helping walk dogs who had been rescued from neglectful situations. But soon, it wasn't enough. He wanted to do more. So he did. Using his own savings, Ryan launched a nonprofit rescue program, focusing on rescuing and rehabilitating stray dogs left abandoned in dangerous conditions. He partnered with vets, trainers, and fellow rescuers, creating a network of people dedicated to giving these animals a second chance, just like Lucky had received. It wasn't easy. There were days when the heartbreak felt unbearable, when he came across dogs too far gone, their bodies too broken to be saved. But for every loss, there was a victory. A pup who found a forever home. A once scared animal who learned to trust again. And through it all, Lucky was by his side, a constant reminder of why he had started. One day, months after launching the rescue, Ryan received a call about a dog abandoned in an old factory. The description sent chills through him. A pup, chained to a post, starving, forgotten. It was too familiar. Without hesitation, he jumped in his truck, Lucky in the passenger seat. They drove in silence, the weight of the past pressing on Ryan's chest. When they arrived, he saw the dog, curled up, barely moving, its body a fragile skeleton. Ryan approached slowly, just as he had with Lucky all those months ago. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, crouching down. "You're not alone anymore." The dog flinched, but didn't have the strength to move. Ryan's throat tightened as he worked to unchain him, lifting the frail creature into his arms. He felt the same desperation he had felt with Lucky, the urgency, the need to save this life. As he carried the dog back to his truck, Lucky leaned over, sniffing the new pup gently before giving a small, reassuring lick. Ryan smiled through his emotions. "Looks like you've got a new friend, Lucky." They drove back to the rescue center, Ryan's heart pounding. He had come full circle. The once broken man who had stumbled upon a dying dog was now the one leading the charge, saving lives just like Lucky's. That night, as Lucky lay curled up beside the new pup, Ryan felt a peace he had never known before. He reached down, scratching Lucky behind the ears. "Because of you, buddy, everything changed." Lucky looked up at him, tail thumping softly against the floor. Ryan exhaled deeply, glancing at the walls of his home now covered with photos of the many dogs he had rescued. He had given them homes, but in return, they had given him something priceless, a purpose, a family. Tears burned at the back of his eyes, but this time, they weren't from sorrow. They were from gratitude. "We did it, Lucky, and we're just getting started." As the night deepened, Lucky snuggled closer to Ryan, letting out a content sigh. For both of them, the journey had begun with pain, but now it was one of love, redemption, and second chances. If Lucky's story moved you, remember, there are thousands of abandoned animals still waiting for their second chance. You can make a difference. Adopt, don't shop. Support local shelters. Be the voice for the voiceless. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this with someone who believes in the power of second chances. Together, we can save more lives.